the dark silhouette at gas station 76. The night shift at Roy's 76 stop was dragging on like molasses, slow, uneventful, and drowning in silence. The gas station sat on a lonely stretch of Route 76, deep in the heart of the desert, miles away from anything that resembled civilization. Tommy Grayson, the owner and only attendant on duty, leaned against the counter, lazily stirring the last of his coffee. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a dull glow over the shelves stocked with stale chips, expired candy bars, and a few sad-looking hot dogs rotating endlessly on the warmer. He glanced at the clock. 1:13 a.m. Another few hours to go. He sighed and turned his attention to the old television mounted in the corner. The local news anchor droned on about a string of disappearances along the highways, but Tommy barely listened. He'd heard it all before. Highway crime wasn't new. Truck hijackings, missing tourists, drug deals gone wrong. Out here in the middle of nowhere, people vanished all the time. Then the silence outside was broken by the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Tommy looked up. A car pulled into the lot. A sleek black Dodge Firebird rolled onto the property, moving smoothly under the glow of the station's flickering overhead lights. The engine rumbled low, a deep, steady growl that seemed louder than it should in the empty night. It glided up to pump number 3, not too fast, not too slow, just precise. Tommy straightened slightly. Late-night customers weren't uncommon. Truckers, drifters, people looking to top off their tanks before disappearing into the desert. But something about this one felt different. He watched as the car came to a perfect stop at the pump, almost as if the driver had rehearsed it. Then, nothing. The driver didn't get out. Tommy squinted through the large glass window of the shop, trying to see inside. The tinted windows were too dark, obscuring whoever was behind the wheel. A few seconds passed. Then, without warning, the fuel pump clicked on. Tommy frowned. A transaction had just been processed. A credit card had been inserted into the pay terminal outside, but he hadn't seen any movement in the car. His grip tightened on the coffee cup. That wasn't normal. Even the laziest of drivers at least reached out to insert their card before fueling up. But not this one. The numbers on the digital display climbed as the tank filled. $10, $20, $30. Still no movement inside the Dodge. Tommy leaned forward, trying to make out a shape behind the windshield. There was a silhouette, a figure sitting perfectly still in the driver's seat. It wasn't shifting, wasn't turning its head, wasn't adjusting anything, just sitting. The gas pump clicked off, signaling the tank was full. The Dodge remained motionless for a few more seconds. Then, without a sound, the car rolled away from the pump. No hesitation, no jerky movements, just gliding back onto the highway like it had never been there. Tommy exhaled slowly, feeling the muscles in his shoulders tense. That had been strange. Maybe just a guy who really didn't want to interact with people. Maybe he had one of those pay-by-app setups, something automated that let him fuel up without rolling down the window. But something about it didn't sit right. There had been no movement in that car at all. Tommy wasn't even sure the driver had been breathing. He forced himself to shake it off. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught the television screen flickering again. The news anchor's voice came back into focus. Police have confirmed another victim along Highway 76. All security footage shows the car pulling up to the gas station, but the driver was never seen. Witnesses report the vehicle appearing multiple times in one night, always at the same location. Tommy's grip on his coffee cup tightened. That sounded way too familiar. He turned up the volume. But just as the anchor was about to describe the suspect's car, the signal cut to static. Tommy swore under his breath and tapped the remote. Nothing, just white noise. He sighed and ran a hand down his face. Maybe he was reading too much into things. It had been a long night, and his brain was making connections where there weren't any. He took another sip of coffee, trying to ignore the unease creeping up his spine. It was probably nothing. But still, he found himself glancing out toward the road, watching for headlights that weren't there. Then, less than an hour later, the Dodge Firebird came back. Tommy stood frozen, eyes locked on the fading glow of the Dodge Firebird's taillights as it disappeared down the empty highway. The soft hum of the station's neon lights was the only sound left. His pulse was slow but heavy, a dull thudding in his ears. Something about that car wasn't right, and as much as he wanted to push the thought aside, his mind wasn't letting go. Instead, it dragged him into a memory, a news segment he had watched just a few weeks ago. Breaking news, another Highway 76 disappearance. He had barely paid attention at the time, just another crime report playing on the gas station's old TV while he cleaned up after a shift. But now every word came back. It started the same way. A driver seen multiple times in a single night, no face, just a shadow behind the wheel. No one ever saw him leave the vehicle, no one ever saw him at all. The same car stopping at the same gas station again and again. Then, gone. The eerie part? The victim was always the attendant working the night shift. Tommy swallowed hard, his throat dry. The police never found the suspect. No witnesses could describe a person, just a vehicle. And the last camera footage always showed the same thing. The gas station worker going outside and never coming back. Tommy blinked hard, shaking the thought away. This was different. That was just a story on the news. Coincidence, right? Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered. A quiet beep echoed from the register. Tommy frowned. That was the pump error notification. He glanced at the screen behind the counter. Pump 3, error. Please check system manually. His breath stalled for a second. Pump 3. The same pump the Dodge had used. The same pump where the last missing attendant had been seen. Tommy hesitated. Then he grabbed a flashlight, forcing himself to shake off the chill crawling up his spine. It was just a glitch, nothing else. Still, as he stepped outside and felt the cold air wrap around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. Just like in the news report, Tommy took a deep breath and stepped outside. The night air unnaturally cold for the desert. His flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, shaking slightly as he aimed it at pump number 3. The digital screen on the pump flickered, displaying a garbled mess of numbers and symbols, as if the system was short-circuiting. Tommy frowned. This was a new pump, only a few months old. It shouldn't be glitching like this. He approached cautiously, listening to the hum of the station's old neon lights, the distant rustling of the wind through the empty lot, and something else. A faint clicking sound, like fingers tapping on glass. He turned quickly, sweeping the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Just the empty lot stretching toward the dark highway. He exhaled slowly and turned back to the pump, kneeling beside the panel. A loose wire, maybe? A software error? He flipped open the small maintenance door at the base of the pump and reached inside, fingers brushing over the cool metal wiring. Then, a noise behind him. A low, distant rumble. A car engine. Tommy's breath hitched as he slowly turned his head toward the road. The Dodge Firebird was coming back, his fingers clenched involuntarily around the flashlight. The same car, the same perfect approach, the same eerie stillness behind the wheel. It rolled smoothly into the lot, pulling up to pump number 3 like before, like it had never left. Tommy stood up, his stomach twisting. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. The pump's error screen flickered again as if responding to the car's arrival. Then, the engine cut off. Silence. The car sat motionless. Tommy's grip tightened on the flashlight. The fuel pump activated. Another transaction. No movement inside the Dodge, no hand inserting a card. Just the numbers ticking upward as the tank filled once more. Tommy felt his throat tighten. What the hell was this? He stood frozen, staring at the dark silhouette behind the windshield, still perfectly motionless, as if it weren't even real. The pump clicked off. The Dodge didn't move. Not immediately. A few seconds passed. Then slowly, the car rolled away from the pump. It turned back onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness. Tommy stood there for a long time, his heart pounding in his ears. Then, from behind him, a quiet beep. "Pump 3, error. Please check system manually." Tommy stood near pump number 3, his breathing slow and deliberate, watching as the Dodge Firebird once again disappeared into the night. He didn't move, didn't even blink. His fingers flexed around the flashlight, the cold metal grounding him. His gut was telling him to go inside, lock the doors, and pretend this wasn't happening. But his feet remained planted, his mind still trying to make sense of what he had just seen. The same car, the same pump, the same silence. And that shadow behind the wheel. Tommy forced himself to move. The pump error message was still flashing on the screen, demanding attention. Maybe focusing on something normal would help him shake off the feeling twisting his insides. He knelt down and pried open the maintenance panel. A tangled mess of wires and circuits greeted him, nothing immediately out of place. But as he reached inside to check the connections, a faint sound cut through the silence. The TV inside the gas station had turned on. Static. Tommy's head snapped up. The store was empty. He had turned off the TV over an hour ago. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his flashlight beam slicing through the night as he stepped toward the door. The static grew louder. Something was wrong. Tommy took a hesitant step forward, his flashlight flickering slightly as he moved toward the glass doors of the gas station. Inside, the TV crackled with static, the glow casting strange, shifting shadows across the empty store. He was sure, absolutely sure, that he had turned it off earlier. The static buzzed through the speakers, an eerie hum that seemed to fill the entire space. Tommy hesitated for a moment before reaching for the door handle. He pulled it open, stepping inside, the cold air from the store's AC brushing against his skin. The second he crossed the threshold, the static stopped. The TV switched channels on its own. A grainy news broadcast filled the screen, the footage shaking slightly like an old corrupted tape. The image flickered, but the sound was clear. Authorities are still searching for the suspect after another gas station worker was reported missing late last night. Witnesses describe a vehicle, dark-colored, possibly a black Dodge Firebird, seen multiple times near the scene. Tommy's stomach twisted. Dodge Firebird. His eyes darted toward the glass window. Through the reflection, he could still see the sleek black car sitting at pump number 3, its engine running silently, the tinted windows revealing nothing inside. The news continued, and Tommy felt his skin crawl as the security footage of another gas station played. The video was almost identical to what had just happened here. A black Dodge pulled up to the pump. It sat there for minutes, its driver never stepping out. Then, just like before, the station's TV turned on by itself. And then, the screen flickered, the feed corrupting. The footage glitched violently, and the screen filled with static again. The voice of the news anchor warped, slowed, stretched into something unnatural. A whisper crawled through the speakers. "He's already here." Tommy's breath caught in his throat. And then, outside, the Dodge Firebird's engine revved. The TV cut to static again, filling the store with its oppressive hum. Tommy's pulse hammered against his ribs. Outside, the Dodge Firebird's engine revved, the low growl vibrating through the glass. For a brief second, Tommy considered running, grabbing his keys, locking the doors and leaving this entire nightmare behind. But the sound of the error notification beeping from the register snapped him back to reality. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move toward the counter. Pump 3, error. Please check system manually. The same glitch. Again. Tommy licked his dry lips. He didn't want to go outside, didn't want to go anywhere near that car. But if he didn't, the pump wouldn't reset. And if the pump didn't reset, the system would freeze, which meant he'd be stuck here with the Dodge Firebird still sitting in his lot. Tommy hesitated for one more breath, then grabbed his flashlight. The store's glass door creaked open, the sound eerily loud in the still night. The air outside felt wrong, colder than it should be. Tommy stepped toward the pump, his stomach twisting with every inch. The Dodge sat perfectly still, its tinted windows hiding whatever was inside. Was it even occupied? Was it ever occupied? He knelt next to the pump, forcing himself to focus. This was just a malfunction, just a glitch. His fingers traced over the wires inside the panel, searching for something, anything, that explained why this was happening. A loose cable, a power surge, a software issue, something normal. Then, a sound, not from the pump, from the car. A soft rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against glass. Tommy's hand froze inside the panel. He turned his head very slowly. The Dodge's passenger side window was rolling down. His breath caught in his throat. It stopped halfway. Darkness inside, nothing visible. Then, from within that abyss, a voice. "You shouldn't be here, Tommy." His heart seized. The voice was his own. Tommy jerked back just as the Dodge's engine roared and the car shot forward, tires screeching as it peeled out of the lot, vanishing down the empty road. He stumbled backward, barely catching himself against the pump. His mind screamed impossible, impossible, impossible. But as he stared at the dust settling in the car's wake, he knew one thing for certain. It was coming back. The night stretched on, but Tommy didn't feel time passing anymore. The only thing that mattered was the car. That damn Dodge Firebird. He had seen it leave, roaring off into the night, disappearing into the highway's endless void. But he knew it was coming back. And when it did, something would be different. The TV was still flickering inside, the screen frozen on static, though the sound had died. Tommy didn't bother turning it off. It was the least of his problems now. Instead, he stood behind the counter, staring out through the glass doors. The station's neon lights buzzed faintly, the occasional flicker breaking the illusion of normalcy. Then, at 3:48 a.m., his breath hitched. Headlights, far down the road. The Dodge was back, but this time it was moving slower, as if it was waiting for something. Tommy felt it this time, an unnatural weight pressing against his chest. The Firebird crawled into the lot, rolling toward pump number 3 like before. But it didn't stop right away. It idled for a moment, its headlights washing over the store's front windows, making it impossible to see inside the car. Tommy clenched his fists. And then, the Dodge suddenly accelerated, whipping around the pumps in a slow, wide circle before pulling up to the same spot as always. Like it was testing something. Like it was taunting him. The engine cut off. Silence. For a long time, nothing moved. Tommy felt something primal inside him screaming not to look away. He held his breath, his eyes locked on the driver's side window. The silhouette was there, still, unmoving. And then, the gas pump activated. The beep of the pump activation jolted Tommy back to reality. He hadn't moved from behind the counter, hadn't touched the system, hadn't approved anything. But there it was. Pump number 3. Active. His skin prickled with unease. Tommy's gaze flicked back to the Dodge Firebird, its sleek black frame gleaming under the neon station lights. The tinted windows remained dark, too dark, like a void instead of glass. Then, the transaction completed itself. No hand inserting a card, no movement from the driver's seat, just a receipt printing out from the pump's terminal. Tommy forced a breath into his lungs. His mind raced, trying to find an explanation that made sense, but there wasn't one. He didn't want to be here anymore, didn't want to be alone with this thing. And then, just like before, his memory dragged him back. Another news report, one that had disturbed him at the time, but now it felt like a warning. A missing truck driver last seen at a desert gas station just like this one. The security footage showed him standing by the pump, filling up his rig. Then, static. The recording glitched, skipping forward in time. And when the feed resumed, the truck was still there. But the driver was gone. The police reviewed the footage frame by frame, but there was no sign of him leaving, no sign of a struggle. Just a blink. One moment he was there, the next, he wasn't. Tommy's stomach tightened. The Dodge Firebird still sat there, waiting. And for the first time, Tommy felt a terrifying thought creep into his mind. What if it's not the driver that disappears this time? What if it's me? The neon lights buzzed loudly overhead, snapping him out of his daze. Then from behind the counter, beep. Pump 3, error, please check system manually. The register beeped again. Pump 3, error, please check system manually. Tommy's hands were clammy, his heart beat too fast. He stared at the screen, then at the receipt sitting in the tray, printed perfectly, despite the fact that no one had inserted a card. Outside, the Dodge Firebird sat in eerie stillness. Something wasn't right about this one. The first 2 visits, it left immediately after fueling. But now, it just sat there, waiting. Tommy hesitated, every nerve in his body screaming at him not to go outside. But if he didn't, the error wouldn't clear, the system would freeze up, the pump would remain locked, and the Dodge would still be here. He swallowed hard. Move. Fix it. Go back inside. That was the plan. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the night. The moment his boots hit the pavement, the wind shifted. The air turned thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on his chest. The Dodge Firebird remained motionless, the dark tint on the windows reflecting only the flickering neon light. Tommy approached slowly, his breaths shallow. Then, the tapping started. Tap, 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 from inside the car, like fingertips drumming against glass. Tommy's spine locked. He forced himself to focus on the pump, kneeling down, opening the metal panel. His fingers dug into the wires, trying to ignore the way the tapping grew louder. He yanked a loose connection, flicked the reset switch. The error cleared. The pump beeped back to life. Tommy exhaled shakily, relief flooding through him. Then, a whisper. "You're next." Tommy's entire body seized. The voice had come from inside the car. He didn't wait, didn't even look. He stood up, spun on his heel, and bolted for the store. The glass door slammed behind him as he locked it, breathing hard. Outside, the Dodge Firebird's engine roared to life. Tires screeched. It peeled out of the lot so fast that it left a trail of dust and burned rubber. Tommy stood there, his pulse hammering. The pump screen flickered once more, displaying a final message before resetting completely. Transaction declined. His stomach dropped. That meant the charge never went through. The Dodge Firebird hadn't taken any fuel, and yet, it had still left with a full tank. Tommy hadn't moved from behind the counter since the Dodge Firebird had left. His hands were still clenched into fists, his breathing shallow, his thoughts an incoherent mess. It had spoken, or something inside of it had. And now, the silence in the gas station felt unnatural. The TV had turned off on its own. The neon sign outside had stopped flickering. Even the distant hum of the desert wind had vanished. Everything was still. Too still. Tommy looked at the clock. 4:32 a.m. Another 90 minutes until sunrise. Maybe it wouldn't come back this time. Maybe whatever this was had moved on. Maybe... Headlights. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. Through the glass doors, he saw them, far down the road. Coming closer. Slowly. The same black Dodge Firebird. But something was different this time. The headlights weren't steady. They flickered as if struggling to stay on. And as the car rolled into the lot, the engine sounded wrong. Distorted, glitching like a voice playing from a broken cassette. It didn't move smoothly this time. It lurched, jerked slightly as it pulled toward pump number 3. Tommy's heart pounded. The Firebird stopped, but the engine kept running. And then, the car horn blared. Loud, too loud. The entire station shook with the sound, the windows rattling violently. Then, just as suddenly, silence. Tommy swallowed hard. For the first time, a terrible thought entered his mind. What if the car isn't just coming here on its own? What if it's breaking down? What if something inside wants out? The horn's echo faded, leaving the station in a ringing silence. Tommy hadn't moved. His knuckles were white as he gripped the counter, his legs locked in place. The Dodge Firebird sat outside, unmoving, its headlights still flickering like a failing light bulb. But something was different. Something about the way the car sat, like it was struggling, like it was broken. And then, the worst part. The passenger door was slightly open. Not fully, just a crack. Like someone, or something, had tried to get out. Tommy's stomach churned. His brain scrambled for something, anything that could explain this. Instead, his mind did what it had done every other time. Dragged him back to another news story. An accident on Highway 76. A Dodge Firebird speeding down the road. It slammed into a barrier at an abandoned gas station. The wreckage was found days later. But when emergency responders pried open the driver's door, the car was empty, no body, no signs of anyone ever being inside. Just a running engine, a full tank of gas, and an open passenger door. Tommy's breath hitched. He was looking at that car. Right now, beep. The register screen flashed. Pump 3, error. Please check system manually. Tommy's breath was slow, controlled. Too controlled. Like his body knew that if he let himself feel what was really happening, he'd start running. And he wouldn't stop. But he had to fix the pump. If he didn't, the Dodge Firebird would stay. That was the pattern. It didn't leave until the error was cleared. He forced himself forward, his boots scraping against the concrete as he stepped outside. The air felt thick, heavy, wrong. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to get back inside, lock the doors, and forget about all of this. But his legs kept moving. Toward pump number 3, toward the open passenger door. The headlights flickered again, casting long, twisting shadows across the pavement. Tommy didn't look inside the car. Couldn't. Instead, he crouched next to the pump, gripping his flashlight tightly as he pried open the metal panel. The wires inside were intact. No shorts, no loose cables, no reason for an error. Then, the sound. Not a whisper this time. A slow, dragging movement, coming from the car. Tommy's jaw clenched. His fingers worked faster, twisting the reset valve, toggling the system switch. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. The dragging stopped, and then, a breath. Right next to him. Low, ragged, wet. Tommy's body snapped into action, his fingers slamming the panel shut as he spun around. The passenger door slammed shut. The Dodge Firebird's engine roared. Tires screeched. A blur of motion. The car peeled out of the lot, its headlights flashing wildly. Tommy staggered back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. His flashlight trembled in his grip. The pump screen flickered one last time. Transaction declined. The Firebird hadn't taken any fuel. Again. Tommy swallowed hard, staring at the stretch of highway where the car had disappeared. He was shaking. Not from fear. From the awful realization creeping into his brain. One more visit. Just one more. And he knew deep down, the next time, it wouldn't leave. Tommy hadn't sat down in nearly an hour. He stood near the counter, his hands gripping its edge so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. The air inside the gas station felt different, thicker, heavier, as if something unseen had settled in the space around him. He wasn't imagining it, not anymore. The Dodge Firebird had been here 4 times tonight. Each time it had acted slightly different. And now, the truth was staring him in the face. It was leading up to something. One more time. Just one more visit. Tommy could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel the storm before the rain, the same way the desert went silent before something moved in the darkness. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. And then, at 5:17 a.m., his breath caught in his throat. The headlights appeared, far down the road, moving slow, deliberate. It wasn't rushing this time. It wasn't testing anything. It was simply coming home. The Dodge Firebird rolled into the lot, crawling across the pavement like a predator that had finally worn its prey down. It didn't circle the pumps this time, didn't hesitate, didn't pretend. It pulled up to pump number 3, same as before. But this time, the driver's side door opened. The headlights multiplied. One after another, they appeared behind the Dodge Firebird, forming a ghostly procession along the highway. Tommy counted at least 6 vehicles, but there could have been more. The dim glow of their lights flickered like dying lanterns in a thick fog, their beams barely cutting through the night. They moved in perfect unison, following the Firebird like a funeral march. Slow, measured, purposeful. Tommy's fingers dug into the counter. This was different. This wasn't just a haunted car returning. This was something else, something bigger. And as the vehicles neared the station, his mind dragged him back to the worst news report he had ever seen. A mass disappearance. It had happened years ago, so long that he'd almost forgotten about it. A convoy of vehicles last seen driving into the desert. None of them were ever found. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation, just gone. Except for one car that was later recovered. A Dodge Firebird, sitting alone at an abandoned gas station, engine still running, passenger door open, no driver, no signs of anyone ever being inside. Just a full tank of gas and an old receipt left in the cup holder. Tommy's throat tightened. He looked down at his own register. The last receipt was still there, still warm from the printer. Outside, the Dodge Firebird pulled into the lot. The other vehicles followed. Then, the station lights went out. The station was dark. The only light came from the glow of headlights outside, their beams cutting jagged lines through the blackness. Tommy's breath was slow, controlled, forced. The register screen flickered once. Then, beep. Pump 3, error. Please check system manually. The error had come every time the car returned, and every time Tommy had gone outside, fixed it, and the Dodge Firebird had left. But this time was different. There were more cars now, waiting, watching. He knew without a doubt, that if he stepped outside, he wouldn't come back. Tommy's hand shook as he grabbed the flashlight. The glass doors rattled slightly as he pushed them open. Outside, the Dodge Firebird sat silently at pump number 3. The other cars lined the lot, engines purring softly in unison, like a strange mechanical heartbeat. He stepped forward. The air felt heavy. Wrong. He reached the pump panel, his fingers barely steady enough to open it. Inside, nothing was wrong. No broken wires, no system faults, just an error that shouldn't be there. Then, a soft click. Tommy's pulse stopped. The passenger door of the Firebird had unlocked, slowly, like something waiting. The cars around him revved their engines one by one. Tommy's vision blurred. He wasn't supposed to fix the pump this time. This wasn't about fuel. This was about him. His fingers hovered over the reset switch. He could flip it, let the system reboot. Maybe the cars would leave. Maybe. The passenger door creaked open. Something moved inside the Firebird. Tommy turned his head slowly, and in the darkness, it smiled. The last thing he heard before everything vanished was the soft, rhythmic beep of the pump resetting itself. And then, silence. The next morning, the station was empty. The pumps were still. The road was quiet. And Tommy Grayson was gone.